My name is Roger Keys, and that's K-E-Y-S, just like car keys. It's too simple, it's always misspelled. But I'm actually a contractor, general contractor. I specialize in historic restoration, and I've been doing that since about 1973. So I do a lot of work in the city, but I do work out here too. So about 35 years ago, my kids were real little, and on a Sunday, my wife and I with the kids were driving around on a Sunday, and we're in Waterman, and all of a sudden she sees a sign for a garage sale. And sure enough, this was on a table at a garage sale. And I picked it up, see that this is solid wood, it's very well constructed, and the markings are very authentic. Had no idea what it was. And so I paid $5 for it, okay, which was, pretty cheap, but I kept thinking, well, this is something significant. And it turns out it really was. But it took me 8 years to actually identify this thing. I had this for 8 years, and I would take it to events where, maybe plane enthusiasts were, like an Experimental Aircraft Association would have like fly-ins on farms around here. And then about 8 years later, I took it to one of those, and a guy came up and he said, "That's an interstate TDR. Where did you find that?" So once I had a name, then I was able to actually start doing my research on this. Now, 35 years ago, we didn't have the internet, obviously. So I'd write to the Naval Archives or the National Archives, and about 6 weeks later, I might get a really ghosty looking photocopy of stuff. And I started talking to people, like the one that told me what it was actually worked on it out of high school in 1944. He was out of high school, and before he went into the service, he worked at the Wurlitzer plant on this airplane, so he knew what it was. But he had no idea whatever, he said, well, it never went anywhere. It was all experimental, and it was, it never went anywhere. So I just figured it was just something interesting they did during World War II in DeKalb, and Wurlitzer was involved in it, which was a cool story. But as I started getting stuff back from the Naval Archives, I found out it not only was used in the South Pacific, but I actually found the air group, the Navy Air Group, was having reunions that actually operated this in the South Pacific. So all of a sudden I'm putting the story of the people that built the airplane in DeKalb together with the guys that flew it in the war in the South Pacific, and neither side knew anything about it. The guys that flew it had no idea where it came from because it was top secret, where it was built, all this stuff. And the people that built it had no idea that it actually went into the war. Interstate aircraft was well known for great engineering, tooling, and production methods to build things quickly. But the Navy Naval Aircraft Factory in the East Coast and all of their people were designing this. They needed it refined for manufacturing expedience so that they could build it quickly. They wanted to do a lot of this kind of stuff in the middle of the country because they didn't know if the Germans were going to attack New York or if the Japanese were going to come over on the Pacific side. So they figured it's a big country, do stuff in the middle. But it's all made of wood because it was experimental, it was top secret, but being experimental, they couldn't utilize war essential materials like aluminum is a big one. So most of the plane is wood with a metal frame, tube frame that held the engines in the body of the plane, and all the wings and everything and coatings was all wood, even around the window, around the engines was all wood. And what's kind of cool about that, they needed a steel tube airframe, and Wurlitzer didn't do steel. They did wood. They made pianos and things, and they were very good at fabricating odd shapes and stuff. They literally had Schwinn Bicycle in Chicago build the airframe for this. Right at Peace Road and Pleasant Street there was the old General Electric factory. A lot of you may remember that. It's empty now. So Interstate Aircraft took over that building to assemble the parts that Wurlitzer made. They were right next door to where Interstate had set up the assembly area. And then Wurlitzer made, and they totally ceased making musical instruments in like 1940, almost just before 1943. And within 6 months, they were producing a 50-foot wingspan twin-engine aircraft. You can see the south end of the building has a big aircraft hangar door on it still today. They build the plane inside this huge, assembly area, and the Navy built an airport to test the plane out, and that became the DeKalb Airport. So everything came together in DeKalb. Wurlitzer made all the parts in their factory, the wooden parts. The shipment from Schwinn came over by rail from Chicago, and then everything was assembled just to the east of the Wurlitzer plant, where there was an old, it was actually a newer building in 1940. It was built as Arlington Furniture. So they would actually build the plane in there, get it totally operational, and then roll it out the aircraft hangar door at the south end of the plant, out on the Navy's field. Then the Navy would come and fly them around, and then make sure they were acceptable. And once they were accepted, they would land them. And then Wurlitzer and Interstate immediately took them apart and put them in crates. So there could have been 8 or 9 crates. I mean, they're big wings and all these parts. And they were shipped by rail to San Diego. And from San Diego, they went on Navy ships, small aircraft carriers and freighter ships that the Navy operated over to the South Pacific. And then when it went overseas, the Navy personnel had their own base. It was called on Bonita Island in the South Pacific. And they would uncrate everything. And the guys, I went to reunions of the guys that operated in the South Pacific, and they said that 6 guys could put the thing together in less than 4 hours. So they started working with Naval Aircraft Factory, developing all these ideas for remotely controlled aircraft. Once they had a truck on the ground at Bonita Island that could actually control the takeoff, and then a TBM Avenger would be overhead, and it would assume control when it was in flight. And a guy in the basement of a TBM Avenger would be controlling the radio control gear. They had developed radio control systems in the early 30s. They worked with RCA, who had just developed the television system in 1934 at the World's Fair, 33. So they used a rotary telephone dial. And with the rotary telephone dials, a series of digits, you can get an awful lot of combinations. And that's how they did the radio control to make it bank right or left or descend, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the television transmitter in the nose of the plane would actually send an image to the TBM Avenger, and the guy would be sitting there with a small screen and watching where the nose of, wherever the camera was pointed, they would actually fly it to it. If they saw an island, they could head for that island, look for a target. You may notice that this plane has a canopy on it. And everybody said, well, it's remotely controlled. Why is there a canopy on it? Well, they reasoned that if it's in the middle of the Pacific and they needed to hit a target 400 miles away to guide this thing with a television system and radio control over 400 miles, they could, anything, radio interference, it probably wouldn't make it. So he would fly it to a Marine base near Bougainville from Bonita, and the pilot would get out and they would put the bomb underneath it, make sure everything was set, and then they could fly it off. So I interviewed a guy named Jack Burrell, and he was actually an RCA engineer back in 1936. And he worked with the team that developed the first television system that went into the nose of this airplane. He pulled this thing out of his bag. He had an Emmy. It's a real Emmy. He put it on the table. I said, is that what I think it is? He says, yeah, it's an Emmy. In 1944, it was top secret, and the rule was you could not talk about it for 30 years. There's 1974. 1964, he took the technology that he put in that airplane nose, and he put it on a golf cart, and he rolled it along the sidelines of a football game, and he won an Emmy for the technical aspect of doing that. There was about 199 of this version here. This is the TDR-1, Interstate TDR-1. About 49 of them were actually deployed against the Japanese in September and October of 1944. And about, I think, 29 of them actually were direct hits on their targets. Most of them, all the ones that were shipped overseas, if they weren't expended against Japanese live targets, when the war ended, they were just taken out on barges and dumped in the ocean. Okay, and there's actually 1.5 surviving interstate TDRs. One's down in Pensacola, Florida, It's a Naval Air Museum on there. And then here in DeKalb, we have some pretty good parts. We have like a fuselage, wing parts, an engine, landing gear, canopies, things like that. We have them displayed out at our airport. So I almost own a warbird. I have, pretty good sized parts of a warbird, and it's all on display out at the airport.